Mike Paralak here to entertain you with the help of poison. Oh my God, look what the cat dragged in. Living my life, sin after sin. Now I grow up and I do it again. Oh my God, look what the cat dragged in. I was listening to a 93 album of theirs called Native Tongue today. I don't have the look what the cat dragged in CD on me, so you'll just have to settle for my singing. But there's a reason I referenced it. But listening to Poison all day, or not all day, but most of the day today, reminded me of some personal things from my own upbringing and life, pertaining to when I lived in foster care. I had a foster mom who was a Poison fan and played that tape, Look What the Cat Dragged In, over and over again in the car and time I lived with them. But anyways, I always talk about, the authorities took us away from our father and all that, and we had to live in foster care, but I don't think I've talked in detail about my 1 year of living in foster care and my experiences in that time. I lived with one family for the majority of that year, but it wasn't smooth sailing. And actually, I lived with 6 different families in that time. But there's a reason for that, and that's why I'm going to tell the story. So the authorities had whatever they needed to remove custody of us from my father in December, like the first or second week of December. So it was just before Christmas time. Now, they found a home for myself and my 2 sisters to live, unbeknownst to me. I assumed I was assumed it was permanent. I was 11, yeah. So I always assumed that wherever we were going, it was going to be a permanent situation. But obviously, I couldn't foresee a lot of stuff, and they didn't exactly volunteer information. But anyways, but they obviously made it a point to find a family that would take all 3 of us at least until Christmas was over, through the holidays. And they did. Went to live with a family. I'm going to take a lesson from the show Dragnet here and actually change the names of the people I'm going to talk about, to protect the innocent. I don't like dropping names on this platform. This is a public platform. So we'll call the foster mom Lisa. I don't remember what the foster father's name was. The only thing I remember about him is all he did was work, and he was the first adult man that I ever knew that watched cartoons. And I use that term loosely because the cartoon he watched was The Simpsons. But this was back when The Simpsons was a new show. And that's another music album I listened to recently. The Simpsons Sing the Blues. It had the Bartman song on it. Everybody, if you can do the Bartman. Anyways, Google it, you'll hear it. But anyways, so the foster father in this household basically just went to work and came home and watched The Simpsons. Beyond that, I barely knew the guy. Of course, I only lived with this family for about a month and a couple weeks. My sisters would remain there for the remaining time that we lived in foster care until we would go to live with an aunt, but that's another chapter of the story. But right now, I want to stick with that first year in my personal perspective of living in the foster care system. So we lived with Lisa and her Simpsons watching workaholic husband through the holidays, then through Christmas. The only other thing I think is I remember this is for the first time in our life we actually had access to watch movies when we wanted to, because it's pretty typical of the times that people had a lot of VHS tapes of movies they recorded off HBO, Showtime and stuff. So a lot of those movies that we had already seen at the show, Look Who's Talking, RoboCop, we were actually able to watch that way, including some ones that I was interested in, but we never saw because our father wasn't interested in it. This was the aftermath of the 6 years of prison that I'm always referencing on this channel. But anyways, so we lived there through Christmas, and then when the holidays were over, which was always the intention, unbeknownst to me, went to live somewhere else. The place that I went to live, I lived so short there, I don't even remember the names of the people that I lived with. I remember the experiences, and I remember the people. I can picture them in my head. I just don't remember the names. So we'll call that foster mother Denise. Oh no, I got to back up one more. I did live with an old couple for one weekend. I believe they might have been a relative to our caseworker, who I'm going to call Bill. So I lived basically with Bill's mother and father for one weekend while they made the transition, and I moved in with this family that it was intended I would live with permanently then for however long I had to live in foster care. The only that one weekend I lived with the old couple, I will say that was my introduction to what a Whopper was, because up until that point in my life, our lives were dictated totally and completely by our father, and he never went to Burger King, so I had no idea what a Burger King Whopper was until I lived with this old couple that weekend who took me to Burger King, where I had my first Whopper. But then I went to live with this family that it was intended I'd stay there for the remainder of the time, whatever time I'd be living in foster care. We'll call that foster mother Denise. Again, I don't even remember. Actually, we'll call her Denise. That might have been her name. I don't remember. I lived with these people so short. But I do remember that I made a big stink in the reason why eventually they said they didn't want me living with them. The foster mother there didn't let me call my biological mother. And I wasn't cool on that. I wasn't accepting to that, and I would make a stink because of it. In retrospect, I don't remember the person's name, but she did have a legitimate argument. The current foster son that was living with them, prior to my living with them, his mother, my understanding is this was her argument why she wouldn't let me call my mom or talk to my mom, is this kid's mom would only call at 3 o'clock in the morning when she was drunk, high, or stoned. So, in retrospect, it's a legitimate argument, but I was still an angry young man myself. Hey, what are you talking about? I can't talk to my mother. At that point in my life, I still hailed my mother on a probably too high of a pedestal myself. But, so anyways, the only distinctive memory I had living there, this would have been in January, February. There was a short time, probably not too much longer than a month. There was some other factors, little factors I wasn't happy. But my most distinctive memory is in the short time I lived there, one of the neighbors had a fire. And I was thinking, when I first we had to get out of the building, and I thought, oh geez, all that's it. Everything's going up in flames. And then I learned that just because there's one fire in one apartment doesn't mean the whole house is going to burn down. But anyways, so from there, I went to live temporarily with this guy. We'll call him Billy Bob. Now, this guy primarily specialized in letting exchange students live in his house. In the short time I lived there, he had a couple of guys from Sweden. If I remember correctly, it was a couple of guys from Sweden living with him. The interesting thing about this guy is would be questionable to me at the time, but I didn't think much of it because I was just a child. But it would come years later when I would get mail from family services saying, "Hey, it is our understanding you lived with Mr. Billy Bob for about 3 weeks." Recently, this man has been brought up on molestation charges of a little girl. We wondered if you might have any information to help out our case. So, that having been said, good thing for me, I think I was a little too old at the time. But I will say, when I lived with this guy, 2 or 3 weeks, whatever the hell it was, some crazy show was on at the time I remember watching. Parker Lewis. There was a show called Parker Lewis on at the time. We watched that show. I would watch the show with these two Swedish guys. Exchange. I think they were college age, actually. They were older than me. I was just a child. But anyways, but this guy, of all the different people I've lived with, I never ran into an adult man more eager to help me out in the bathroom. It was a good thing for me at this point in my life. I already had a habit of shutting and locking the bathroom door when I would use the facilities. This guy constantly be knocking on the door. You need some help in there? I'm good, buddy. But when I got that letter years later, I would think back to that and go, oh, okay. So anyways, that was Billy Bob. And then from Billy Bob, I went to live with the foster parents that I would live with for the remainder of the time I was in foster care. Before both myself and my sisters would go live with family, aunts and uncles. But anyway, so this foster parents, we'll call them Polly, her husband Mo, and their 5-year-old son, little Brad. Oh, and also a former foster kid who, my understanding, lived with them, and then went away and then came back to live with them. Which, stay tuned. I have a story to tell there. We'll call that kid Joe. Anyways, this is getting back to why I opened the show with a Poison song. So anyways, I lived with Polly, her husband, Mo, and their 5-year-old son, little Brad, and a former foster kid of theirs who came back to live with them when he was of the age of 18, named Joe. Anywho, in the time I lived there, at this point, my caseworker told me, Mike, because of what happened with the other one where I was acting up because the woman wouldn't let me call my mom, whatever. I was told by the caseworker, Mike, you gotta make this one work because if you don't, it could jeopardize our case and you could go back with your father. Well, at this point in my life, I was not prepared to do that. So I was like, at this point, I sucked it up and I just put up with the inconveniences that I had to put up with. But Polly was a good foster mom. I mean, my need for shelter, clothes, and food was met. And, her husband, who I'm calling Mo, was in the service. And this was during the Iraq War. This is during the Desert Storm War, actually. He was gone a lot of the time. I didn't see it at the time because I was a child, but like in the aftermath of living with them, I always wondered, especially, you know, a year or two after living with them when I would, get a more adult mind. I always wonder if her and the kid, because she was a bit younger than the military husband, if her and the kid, Joe, the one I'm calling Joe, had something going on discreetly. He was living with them, helping them to remodel the house, which I learned a lot. I learned a lot about remodeling a basement and attic at the time I lived with these people. But yeah, and in the years after no longer living with them, I would think back to subtle things that I saw and go, son of a gun. I wonder if she was really, really, she didn't like the fact that I wouldn't fall asleep when she wanted me to. She had this thing where she would flash a flashlight in my face to see if I was asleep. Now, all the time, the majority of the time she did this, I must have been asleep because I have no recollection of it. The only recollection I do have of it is the one time she flashed this flashlight in my face. I already knew this was her trick because she told me, I knew you were sleeping. You weren't sleeping. I flashed a flashlight and your eyes flickered. So the one time she did this to my eyes, I shut them tight. I remember thinking, I wonder if I'm going to hear something interesting in the next room now. But unfortunately, I did fall asleep for real soon after that. Anyways, yeah, Polly, Mo, and their 5-year-old son, little Brad, and Joe, the 18-year-old former foster son who came back to live with them now that he's 18 to help them remodel their house. Anywho, last I heard of them was by the caseworker.